I hear it all the time from you lot. High-end graphics cards are just too big. We don't like fat graphics cards. 3 slots, really? Well, for those of you who like your graphics cards lean and still very mean, I have just the product for you. Meet the new Galax Katana, a GTX 1070 that keeps its elbows tucked in. Welcome back to Harbour Unboxed. Yes, it is finally time for our Galax Katana review. Back in April, when word broke that Galax would be introducing a single-slot GeForce GTX 1070 graphics card, I just knew I had to have one. Thankfully, Galax agreed and promptly sent one over. Okay, enough bragging about my new GTX 1070 graphics card. Time to find out if it is actually any good. But before we do jump to the benchmarks, let's quickly go over the card and strip it down for some sexy PCB shots. Yeah, I really need to get out more. Anyway, down to business. So, obviously the Galax Katana is a bit special as there are very few single-slot gaming graphics cards on the market these days. They're certainly a rare find. In fact, to my knowledge, this is the only single-slot air-cooled GTX 1070 in the world. Generally speaking, anything sporting a thermal design power rating that's greater than 75 watts features a dual-slot cooler strapped onto it, as the larger coolers dissipate the added heat more efficiently. This is a practical solution as it greatly reduces not just the operating temperatures, but also the volume. Not only that, but for years now, desktop systems have been designed with dual-slot graphics cards in mind, so you might be wondering why bother making a single-slot card at all then? Without question, the GTX 1070 Katana is a niche product. That said though, there are those out there who will love what this slimmed-down graphics card has to offer. There are compact, small form factor systems that can't afford to sacrifice expansion slots, as their owners wish to install additional add-in cards such as a sound card, NVMe SSD, Thunderbolt 3 controller, additional SATA ports, and so on. It is also worth noting that you will only require a single slot between the cards for SLI support rather than the typical 2-slot spacing. This means you should actually see better operating temperatures with a pair of Katana cards when compared to 2 bigger dual-slot cards on a board such as the Asus ROG Strix Z270G Gaming or the ASRock Z270M Extreme 4, for example. A few of you in the comment section of my latest unboxing video where I discovered the Katana for the first time said that this is a card you would actually like to use in your workstation, maybe even quite a few of them. So that's an option as well. Anyway, as I said, this is a niche product and it certainly won't be for everyone, but for those who have been seeking a relatively high-end graphics card that only takes up a single slot, then the Katana will be a godsend. As a single slot solution, the Katana measures just 16mm thick. Not bad given the Palette GTX 1080 Ti that I just reviewed measured 3 times as wide. Even though this is a thin card, it's still quite long, measuring 254mm end to end. That said, the PCB accounts for only 67% of the card's total length. Covering the entire front side is a pancake-like aluminium fan shroud, which has been painted gunmetal grey. Towards the I/O end, we find some cutouts in the fan shroud which are meant to help with cooling, and at the opposite end we do of course find a 70mm blower fan. The fan pushes air over what Galax call a turbo radiator. This is an all-copper heatsink featuring an advanced vapour chamber. Being that it is constructed entirely from copper, it's a bit of a heavy sucker, tipping the scales at 329 grams just for the heatsink. In fact, for a compact single-slot card, the Katana is surprisingly heavy, weighing 603 grams in total. Finally, under the cooler we find a custom-designed PCB housing the GTX 1070 GPU and 8GB of GDDR5 memory. Galax says it uses high-quality components in the construction of this card, but doesn't go into detail other than to say it features an optimised electrical circuit. What we do find under the hood is a 4+1 VRM, which is the same configuration used by Nvidia's Founders Edition model, though the VRM has switched sides of the GPU and is now placed behind the display outputs. This layout means that the cool air hits the GPU section of the heatsink first, and then cools the inductors, MOSFETs and capacitors of the VRM, which can happily handle higher operating temperatures. Because Galax has gone with frequencies that are very close to Nvidia's own specification, they have stuck with the standard single 8-pin PCIe power input. Speaking of frequencies, out of the box Galax has pushed their base frequency to 1518 MHz, and this is a very small increase over the stock 1506 MHz frequency. This has resulted in a boost frequency of at least 1708 MHz, though of course GPU Boost 3.0 will push the frequency higher. When gaming, for example, the frequency was often seen hovering around 1772 MHz, but at times did drop down to 1734 MHz. When it comes to display outputs, Galax has had to make a few sacrifices due to the single slot design. Here we find just a single DisplayPort 1.4 output. Typically you can find 3 of these on a GTX 1070. Accompanying that single DisplayPort connector is HDMI 2.0B and a dual link DVI output. If you are able to utilize all of these 3 outputs, then you still can support 3 monitors simultaneously. Okay, so that about covers everything. It's time for the benchmarks. Please note our KB Lake Core i7 7700K test system was clocked at 4.9 GHz, and we did test the GTX 1070 Katana both in its out-of-the-box configuration as well as a custom overclock. Overclocked, we pushed the core to a base frequency of 1719 MHz, and the memory went to 2002 MHz. That's a 13% increase for the core and a 10% increase for the memory. This overclock resulted in an actual operating frequency of 1949 MHz when gaming, though we did have to increase the fan speed to 80%, and this did make the card a bit loud. Anyway, on to the results. As expected, the GTX 1070 Katana was a few frames slower than the bigger, beefier dual and triple slot 1070s from Palette, Gigabyte and Asus. That said, out of the box the performance is still very respectable, as the Katana sat a few frames ahead of the Founders Edition model. Not only that, but rendering an average of 90 FPS in Battlefield 4 at 1440p using the ultra high quality settings is nothing to sneeze at, especially for a single slot card. Moving to Cry Primal, we find much the same. The Katana is able to best the Founders Edition once again, while it was just a few frames behind the bigger partner card models. Something I didn't point out previously is how the card performs once overclocked. Of course, it's not going to beat an overclocked dual slot card, but still, hitting 68 FPS in this test was impressive all the same, though again it was a bit loud with our overclock. Star Wars Battlefront doesn't provide anything we haven't seen already, so I'll wrap up the benchmarks here. Or at least the graph results, and I'll move on to a few minutes of gameplay. Then after that we will check out the thermals and power consumption. I had a quick play around with Battlefield 1, Doom and Prey. Let's see how the Katana got on. I didn't really know exactly what to expect from the Galax GTX 1070 Katana when it came to temperatures, other than I expected them to be high. Just how high though was hard to say. However, at 82 degrees I was pleasantly surprised, and out of the box the card wasn't even that loud. The fact that it came in a degree under the Founders Edition while providing slightly better performance is mighty impressive. Overclocked, the card also hit 82 degrees, though the fan speed was increased quite a bit, and while far from reference card loud, it was still pretty loud. For those wondering, I did check surface temperatures with an infrared heat gun and found the shroud towards the centre of the card reached 44 degrees, which was surprisingly cool. The cutouts in the fan shroud where the hot air exits the card did hit 56 degrees, but even then that's very reasonable. Now here are some samples of the operating volumes. When it came to power consumption, the Katana was very respectable, consuming only slightly more power than the Founders Edition model. Even overclocked, it still consumed less power than most custom board partner cards do out of the box, so a good result here. Well, there you have it, the Galax GTX 1070 Katana. A small, or rather thin, graphics card that still gets the job done. While very impressive, I guess it's not totally surprising given they are now cramming GTX 1070 and even 1080 GPUs into laptops, but hey, it's still one of a kind. Currently, pricing is a bit of an unknown. You can buy it directly from the Galax store in the US for $420, which isn't too bad, though the cheapest 1070s are currently selling for around $380 right now. Still, given this is the world's only single slot GTX 1070, you can't really complain about the price. It's hardly a huge premium to pay anyway. Also, keep in mind, once availability does improve, pricing will likely as well. Overall, I found the operating temperature and volume very acceptable. Out of the box performance was also great, and the card itself does look quite smart. For those seeking a slim high-end graphics card, there simply is no better option. I guess you could argue that is because there is no other option, but still, it is a good graphics card. So that's it for this one. I'm your host Steve, and do stay tuned because tomorrow we will have that Ryzen 1400, 1600 and 1700 comparison. I'll see you guys then.